It was the worst day of her life. Tolu had been with Femi for almost 2 years, and in all that time she thought their love was unshakable. They had spent countless nights talking about their future, making plans and dreaming together. But now, standing in front of her with a cold look in his eyes, Femi was telling her everything she had feared. "Tolu," he said, his voice distant, "I can't do this anymore." Tolu's heart dropped. She felt the world around her shift, like the ground was giving way beneath her. "What do you mean? I thought we were happy. I thought we—" "You're just not the same anymore," Femi cut her off, his gaze flickering over her body in a way that made her feel exposed. You're not what I want. I need someone more fit, someone who takes care of themselves." Tolu blinked, trying to process his words. "What do you mean? Is this about my weight?" she asked, her voice shaking. Femi nodded, his lips pressed together in a thin line. "You're beautiful, but you're too big, Tolu. It's not what I'm looking for." The words hit her like a slap in the face. She felt as though the room was spinning, and her knees buckled, forcing her to sit down on the couch. She couldn't breathe. All the love she had given, all the memories they had shared, felt worthless in that moment. Femi had just discarded her because of her weight. I thought you loved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I do," he said, but his words felt empty. "But I can't do this anymore. I need someone who's healthier, someone who takes care of themselves like I do. I think it's best if we go our separate ways." And just like that, he left, without a second glance, without a care for the girl whose heart he had just broken. Tolu sat there for hours, her tears staining her face. She cried until her head ached, until her eyes were swollen. She felt a deep emptiness inside her, a loneliness that consumed her. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to move forward. All she could think about was how Femi had rejected her, how he had made her feel like she wasn't good enough. But deep down, beneath the layers of sadness, something inside her stirred. A quiet, unyielding voice that told her she didn't need Femi. She didn't need anyone who couldn't love her for who she was. She was worth more than the way he had treated her. Days turned into weeks, and as Tolu wiped away the remnants of her broken heart, she began to realize that she couldn't stay in this dark place. She couldn't let herself spiral into self-loathing and sadness. It was time for a change. With a newfound determination, Tolu walked into the local gym one morning. She hadn't stepped into a gym in years, but she knew this was the first step, not just for Femi but for herself. She was going to change, not to fit into anyone else's standards, but to feel better about herself, to feel healthy and strong. The first few days were brutal. Her muscles ached, her body protested every movement, and the treadmill felt like a cruel joke. But Tolu didn't give up. Each day she pushed herself harder. She learned to love the burn, to feel empowered by the sweat pouring down her face. She began to see small changes in herself, not just in her body, but in her mindset. She was no longer doing this for Femi. She was doing it for herself. Alongside her workouts, Tolu changed her diet. She replaced the sugary snacks she had once relied on with fruits and vegetables. She swapped out fried foods for grilled chicken and whole grains. It wasn't easy at first, and she often found herself tempted to give in to her cravings, but she stuck with it. Slowly, the changes became visible. Her clothes began to fit better, her energy levels soared, and for the first time in a long time, she felt proud of herself. Months went by, and Tolu's transformation was undeniable. She had shed 60 pounds. But it wasn't just her body that had changed, it was her confidence. She had learned to love herself again, to appreciate her strength, both physical and emotional. Her reflection in the mirror no longer reminded her of the girl who had been dumped by a man who couldn't see her worth. It reminded her of a woman who had taken control of her life and her happiness. One evening, as she walked through the mall with her friends, Tolu caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Femi. He hadn't seen her yet, but Tolu froze, unsure of what to do. A part of her wanted to turn around and walk away, to pretend she hadn't seen him. But another part of her wanted him to notice her. She wanted to see the look on his face when he saw the woman she had become. As if on cue, Femi turned around and their eyes locked. At first, he didn't seem to recognize her. He blinked a few times, his eyes scanning her body as if trying to place her. And then slowly it hit him. His jaw dropped, and he took a step toward her, his face lighting up with surprise. "Tolu?" he asked, his voice incredulous. "Is that really you?" Tolu smiled softly, her heart beating faster, but this time it wasn't out of hurt. It was out of strength. "Yes, it's me," she replied, her voice calm, confident. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Femi's eyes raked over her body, his gaze lingering on her new figure. "You look amazing," he stammered, his voice laced with admiration. "I didn't expect this. You've really changed." Tolu could hear the admiration in his voice, but she wasn't interested. "Not anymore." "Thank you," she said, her smile widening. "But I didn't change for you, Femi. I changed for myself." Femi looked taken aback, his eyes flickering with a mixture of surprise and regret. I made a mistake, Tolu. I see that now. I was wrong to judge you like I did. You were always beautiful, and I was too blind to see it. Can we try again? I've missed you." Tolu felt a flash of anger rise in her chest, but she quickly swallowed it. She had worked too hard to let him back into her life, especially not now, when she had learned her true worth. "I don't think that's a good idea," she replied, her voice firm but gentle. "You had your chance, Femi. I've moved on, and so should you." For a moment, Femi stood there staring at her, his face a mixture of confusion and regret. But Tolu didn't waver. She had come so far, and she was no longer the same girl who had cried over his rejection. And just as she was about to turn away, a new voice interrupted them. "Everything okay here, babe?" a deep, reassuring voice asked. Tolu turned to see a tall, handsome man standing beside her, his arm casually draped over her shoulder. It was Kunle, the man who had swept her off her feet in the months after she had let go of Femi. Kunle had been patient, kind and supportive as Tolu continued to grow into herself. They had started dating a few months ago, and with him she felt more loved and cherished than ever. Femi's face darkened as he realized who the man beside Tolu was. He opened his mouth to say something, but Tolu cut him off with a smile. "This is Kunle," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "My boyfriend. And Femi, you should know. I'm happy now. I've moved on." Kunle smiled, his presence radiating confidence. "Nice to meet you," he said, offering Femi a firm handshake. Femi stood there speechless, watching as Tolu walked away with Kunle by her side, her heart light and free. Tolu had learned an important lesson through everything she had been through. Her happiness was her own to control. And now, with Kunle by her side, she knew that the love she had once lost had only paved the way for something even better. Tolu walked alongside Kunle, her heart lighter than it had been in years. With every step she could feel the weight of her past, the sadness, the heartbreak, the rejection falling further behind her. She glanced at Kunle, his warm smile comforting her, and couldn't help but feel grateful for his presence. He had been everything she needed during the time she had spent finding herself again. They reached the car, and Kunle opened the door for her with a gentle smile. As they both settled into the car, Tolu couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting in her life. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace with who she was, inside and out. Kunle noticed her silence. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft but caring. Tolu looked out the window for a moment before turning back to him. "Yeah, I'm just thinking." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "About what?" Tolu hesitated, but she felt safe enough to share. "I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd be happy after what happened with Femi. It's like my whole world collapsed and I had to rebuild from scratch. And now, I don't know. It just feels surreal." Kunle reached over and gently took her hand. "You've come such a long way, Tolu. I'm proud of you. I know it wasn't easy. You're stronger than you think." Tolu smiled, squeezing his hand. "Thank you, Kunle. Honestly, I don't know what I would have done without you. You've been here through everything." Kunle gave her a playful wink. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." But as the car drove through the busy streets of Lagos, Tolu's mind drifted back to Femi. His sudden appearance had left her feeling conflicted. Part of her had wanted to lash out at him, to remind him of how much he had hurt her. But instead she had chosen to walk away with grace, something she hadn't thought herself capable of before. But it didn't change the fact that, for a moment, she had seen the regret in his eyes. It was the same regret she had felt for months after he left her. And now here she was, happy, fulfilled, and in love with someone who truly saw her. Still, something gnawed at her heart. Femi's sudden reappearance had made her question whether he truly regretted what he had done, or if he was simply trying to salvage his ego. Could he really love her the way she deserved, or was he just looking for validation? Kunla noticed the far-off look in her eyes as they pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe. He parked the car and turned to face her. "Tolu, I know something's still bothering you. You can talk to me, you know that, right?" Tolu sighed, grateful for his patience. "It's just, Femi, I don't know what he wants. One moment, he's all regret and apologies, and the next, it's like he's trying to pick up where we left off. But I don't know if I should let him back in. It's confusing." Kunla reached for her hand again, his grip firm and reassuring. "Tolu, you don't need to worry about him. You've worked so hard to get to where you are now. Femi had his chance. If he truly cared, he wouldn't have walked away from you the way he did. Don't let his insecurities make you question your worth. You've got so much more to offer than anyone who didn't recognize it." His words were like a balm to her wounded heart, and Tolu smiled at him gratefully. She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "You're right, I need to stop letting the past define me. I've come so far, and I'm not going to let anyone take that from me." Kunle grinned and kissed her forehead. "That's the spirit. Now how about we enjoy this day together? No more thinking about Femi, I promise." Tolu laughed, feeling lighter than she had in ages. "I like the sound of that." They stepped out of the car and walked into the cafe, the warm air around them filled with the sounds of life and laughter. But even as they sat down to enjoy a quiet lunch, Tolu's mind couldn't completely let go of the image of Femi standing there, pleading for another chance. She had seen the vulnerability in his eyes, but she wasn't sure if that was enough to warrant forgiveness. As they ate, Kunla continued to speak to her softly, pulling her back into the present moment. But Tolu couldn't help but wonder, what if Femi wasn't the person he seemed to be now? What if he had truly changed, learned from his mistakes, and could be the man she needed him to be? Was there any chance for reconciliation? Or had she already found the love she deserved with Kunla, someone who had stood by her all along? That evening, as Tolu lay in bed, the questions circled in her mind, keeping her awake long after Kunla had fallen asleep beside her. It wasn't just about her past with Femi, it was about the future, about what kind of relationship she wanted moving forward. She had worked so hard to rebuild herself, to become the woman she was now. Did she want to risk going back to someone who had once made her feel small? Or had Kunla already proven to her that true love didn't come with conditions? The next morning, Tolu woke up early, determined to take control of her thoughts. She had already made a promise to herself that she wouldn't let Femi's actions or regrets affect her any longer. But something inside her told her she needed closure. She needed to know if there was a possibility of moving on from the pain he had caused. So after breakfast, she sent Femi a message, asking if they could talk. The wait for his response felt like an eternity, but when her phone finally buzzed, she took a deep breath and read his reply. "I think we need to have that conversation. I've been thinking a lot about everything, Tolu. I owe you that much." Tolu's heart raced, but she knew she was ready. Whether this conversation would bring closure or open a door to something new, she was ready to face it head-on. She told Kunal about the message, and he gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got this, babe. Whatever happens, I'm here for you." And with that, Tolu prepared to meet Femi, knowing that no matter the outcome, she had already come so far and was ready to continue building the life she deserved. Tolu sat nervously on the couch, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. She had debated for hours whether or not to meet Femi, and now, with the time for their meeting drawing closer, she wasn't sure what to expect. Her thoughts were a jumble of emotions: anger, confusion, sadness, and a tiny spark of hope. She glanced over at Kunla, who was sitting beside her, his presence as calming as always. "Are you sure about this?" Kunla asked, his voice soft but sincere. He had supported Tolu every step of the way since they had met, always putting her needs first. The idea of Femi re-entering her life was hard for him to accept, but he respected her decision to seek closure. Tolu looked into Kunla's eyes, her heart swelling with affection. I need to know, Kunla. I need to know if I can move on completely or if there's something still unresolved inside of me. I've worked so hard to get to this place, but I can't let go until I have answers from him. Kunla nodded, his expression soft but concerned. I understand. Just remember, no matter what happens, you're not alone. I'm here. Tolu smiled gratefully, and with a final deep breath, she stood up and grabbed her bag. The anticipation was almost too much to bear as they walked out of the house, with Kunla holding the door open for her. As they made their way to the meeting spot, Tolu tried to steady her nerves, knowing that this was a pivotal moment in her life. She wasn't the same girl she had been when Femi left her. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of her worth. When she arrived at the park where she was supposed to meet Femi, her heart began to race. The air was thick with tension, and she found herself wishing she could just skip the conversation entirely. But as she spotted him in the distance, leaning against a tree, she knew she had no choice but to face him. Femi was standing there just like she remembered him, with his handsome smile and piercing eyes. But something was different. His posture was slumped, his usual arrogance replaced by a quiet humility. As he saw Tolu approach, he straightened up, his eyes searching hers as if trying to read her thoughts. Tolu, he said softly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar sorrow. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. Tolu stood still for a moment, her emotions swirling. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was here, words seemed to fail her. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Femi, sensing her hesitation, stepped closer, his face filled with remorse. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to apologize, Tolu. I was selfish and cruel, and I regret how I treated you. I thought I was doing what was best for me, but I was wrong. I was blind to the incredible person you are, and I hurt you in the process. I never should have left you. Tolu felt the sting of his words, but she pushed it down, not letting herself falter. She had come this far, and now was the time to stand strong. Femi, it's been a long time, she began, her voice steady but calm. I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything, and honestly, it wasn't easy. You hurt me in ways I never imagined, and for months I questioned myself. I felt like I wasn't enough. But what I've learned through all of this is that I am enough. I'm more than enough. And I've come to realize that I don't need you to validate me. Femi's face fell, the weight of her words settling on him like a heavy burden. He opened his mouth to speak, but Tolu held up her hand. I don't want to dwell on the past anymore, she continued. I've healed, I've grown, and I've found happiness in ways I never thought possible. Femi's eyes softened, and for a moment Tolu thought she saw a flicker of something in his gaze. Something like regret, but also recognition. He had seen the transformation in her, and it humbled him. I'm truly sorry, Tolu, he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. I never meant to hurt you. Tolu nodded, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. I know, Femi, but we can't change what's already been done. I've learned to forgive myself for letting you hurt me, but I can't go back. Not to you, not to what we had. I deserve more than that. There was a long pause as Femi took in her words. He looked down at the ground, struggling to find the right response, but Tolu knew there was nothing left to say. She had already made her decision, she had found strength in herself, and now she was ready to move forward with her life. Before Femi could say anything else, Tolu turned and began walking away. She could feel Femi's gaze on her back, but she didn't look back. She had closed that chapter of her life, and now it was time to embrace the new one that was waiting for her. As she reached the car, Kunla was waiting for her, a reassuring smile on his face. How did it go? He asked gently, but Tolu could see the concern in his eyes. Tolu climbed into the car, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. It went as I expected. I got the closure I needed. Kunla looked at her with pride. I'm glad. You're stronger than you realize, Tolu. She smiled at him, her heart swelling with affection. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my rock. Kunla leaned in and kissed her softly on the forehead. I'll always be here, Tolu. Always. As they drove off into the sunset, Tolu felt lighter than she had in a long time. Her past no longer had a hold on her. She had faced it, learned from it, and let it go. She was no longer the girl who had been broken by Femi's rejection. She was a woman who had taken control of her own happiness and was ready for whatever the future had in store. And as she sat beside Kunla, her heart full of love and gratitude, she knew that the journey she had started was only just beginning.